the ramp and put it on top.
First This News. Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. Israel is facing renewed calls from the United States to get more aid into Gaza. US officials said Israel and Egypt needed to make sure that the southern Rafah crossing was reopened as soon as possible. The two countries have blamed each other for its continued closure. The State Department spokesperson, Vedant Patel, said Washington was concerned that no fuel was entering the Gaza Strip via Rafah.
We are concerned that travel and the flow of fuel of aid into Gaza via Rafah has come to a complete halt, but we are continuing to work with the government of Egypt, with the government of Israel, to do everything we can to make sure that this gets open as soon as possible. There are, of course, legitimate security and operational concerns that are legitimate, and we're continuing to work through those processes.
Israel has complained that the UN's top court is being exploited by South Africa, which has called for an order to halt the Israeli offensive in Rafah. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said South Africa had presented biased and false claims that relied on Hamas sources. Israel's legal team will present its case to the International Court of Justice on Friday. The Biden administration has announced that it will end new leases for coal mining in the Powder River Basin, which produces nearly half of the United States coal. Elsa Orkney reports.
The region covers vast tracts of the western states of Montana and Wyoming. It won't affect current coal leases. Mining groups have called the move outrageous, saying it's a blow to energy security and to mining states and communities. But it's been praised by climate activists, who say it will safeguard the environment and significantly cut carbon emissions. The move comes as the United States continues its shift away from coal. President Biden sees it as a way of appealing to young people and progressive voters, while Donald Trump has promised to reverse the Democrats' green policies if he's elected.
Trade and economic cooperation is the theme of President Putin's second day of his visit to China. The Russia leader is in the northeastern city of Harbin, not far from the Russian border. The BBC's China correspondent, Stephen McDonnell, reports from Beijing.
The symbolism of a visit to a place where Chinese and Russian cultures meet is expected to be on full display. However, with the opening of a trade expo there, the real emphasis will be on economic links, as Russia's leader seeks greater backing for his war economy. The US State Department has this week criticized Beijing for supporting Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine by rebuilding his country's defense industrial base. Washington has vowed to take what is described as appropriate action in...
Stephen McDonnell. This is the latest world news from the BBC. Officials in Canada say wind and rain have halted the advance of a wildfire threatening a town near the oil sands in the west of the country. The flames have forced nearly 7,000 residents of Fort McMurray in Alberta to evacuate their homes. The city was devastated by a wildfire 8 years ago. Flooding has worsened in parts of the Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul as water from swollen rivers and lakes threatens cities downstream. More than 150 people are now known to have died across the state. Over 500,000 have been displaced by the floods and landslides, which began nearly 3 weeks ago. Officials in Russia's Belgorod region say a woman and her 4-year-old son have been killed in a Ukrainian drone strike. Over the border in Ukraine, several Russian drones struck Kharkiv, as our defense correspondent Jonathan Beale reports from the city.
Kharkiv has been a regular target of Russian drones and missile strikes, but these latest attacks were more intense and followed a visit by President Zelensky. He travelled to the city earlier in the day to be briefed on the latest military situation, with fighting ongoing near the border with Russia. Tonight, the hum of drones could be heard over the city. On the ground, there was the occasional burst of machine gun fire and tracer rounds trying to bring them down. A few were intercepted, but there were also loud explosions.
The Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, has raised the possibility of closing French military bases in the country. Speaking at a conference in Dakar, he asked why Senegal still had several French bases more than 60 years after independence from France. Mr. Sonko promised to strengthen ties with Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, who have pushed out French troops and turned to Russia for help in fighting jihadist insurgencies. Sissoko questioned the impact of the French military presence on the country's sovereignty. That's the latest BBC News.
Hello, this is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. Joe Biden is blocking the release of audio recordings of his interviews with the official investigator who in February branded him an elderly man with a poor memory. Special counsel Robert Hare forced a political firestorm with the claim in his report that the president's handling of classified documents. Republicans are keen to depict Mr. Biden as being too doddery to hold office. I asked our correspondent in Washington, Will Vernon, if we know what's in these audio recordings.
We know most of what they contain because we've already had the transcripts. They show the conversations that Joe Biden had with investigators, conversations in which, according to the report, Mr. Biden failed to remember key dates, including when he became vice president, and most humiliating of all, when his son died. So that report, whilst it more or less exonerated Mr. Biden legally, because it recommended no charges be brought against him, right, for handling classified documents, politically it was very damaging indeed, because it came around the same time that Mr. Biden made a series of embarrassing slip-ups, confusing the names of world leaders and countries, slurring his words. Bear in mind that even before that, over 70% of Americans thought that Mr. Biden was too old to be president. The report's language just couldn't have been worse. And Mr. Biden said that the conversations that he had with the Justice Department as part of that investigation were misrepresented in the report. But then fast forward to now, when they're about to be released, the White House blocks them, right? So that's led some people to accuse the White House of double standards. If, Mr. Biden was misrepresented, and he's not a forgetful old man, then kind of show us the tapes. Now, the official line from the White House, from the Justice Department, is that the audio in these tapes is sensitive, it relates to law enforcement, and that if they were released, they'd be kind of chopped up and stitched together and used in kind of dirty political stunts and ads by the Republicans.
And he's using executive privilege to prevent their release. What does that mean and how does that work?
Executive privilege is kind of like a special pass that the president has to withhold information from the American public, and the use of it was recommended for these tapes by the Attorney General Merrick Garland. And because of that, a little earlier this evening, a congressional committee voted to advance a measure that would hold Mr. Garland in contempt of Congress. That's a bit like contempt of court. Now, that motion isn't binding, Alex, but there needs to be a full vote of the House for that. But it is still significant because it's part of an ongoing battle, a war, really, between the Justice Department, the DOJ, and Republicans in Congress. They have accused Mr. Garland of withholding the tapes for political reasons to protect the president. Now,